Welcome to Busy Bee Living. Today we are going to build a simple box. Now right here we're setting up our table saw so that we can cut the miters for our sides. We're going to use a scrap piece of wood just to dial in exactly where we want that fence put, because as you can see we put a block up against the fence. This way when you're making a cut here, you're not going to get a piece to bind up against the fence, which could cause a pretty bad accident. So it's a very important piece here to have that. But once we get it dialed in, we can go ahead and start cutting our actual piece. Now this first cut, we're going to have to come back and actually cut the other miter on the other side. But as you can see, as I'm making these cuts, I'm flipping the material over. This makes sure that the 45 on the other side is going in the proper direction. Now we can take that first cut and just trim it off so we have a nice 45-degree miter. Now we gotta put a dado in here to accept the lower panel of the box. Without switching the blade though, we're just gonna set the fence and run some pieces through and slowly move the fence until the cut will accept the 1/4 inch piece of paneling. I like to use a scrap though piece of wood here as I move the fence so I can dial in the actual width of that dado without going too far over on a good piece. Now that we have those cut into the box bottom, we can come back here and we put the piece of material that we're cutting down here. This is a 1/4 inch piece of ply. And we're going to mark just as that piece comes to the end of the actual side. This is an easy way to get an accurate cut. And if we did everything right, it should come out in a square cut here. As you can see, when I spin the piece over, I still went ahead and made an indication mark line with a pencil just to make sure it's lining up proper in case for some reason our pieces came out incorrect. But we cut them all at once, so it should be a perfect square. And then we can put that piece right into its place. And this is actually going to help us with the glue up. Now I've seen, people use techniques of just using painter's tape, laying the box out, and then folding it up. But because we have this panel being accepted in the bottom, once that panel goes into those dados, we can easily keep this box into place, so you won't need to do that. Now we're trying to get this project done a little bit faster, so we're just going to use our pin nailer to hold the box into place until the glue has a chance to dry. But this allows us to keep moving on with our process and moving the project forward. Put all together, we can come back, make sure all those pin nails are flush with the top, and then check for squareness. All we do is take a measurement diagonally and they should each match. Now we're going to actually attach this piece of plywood to the top. See, we're actually going to attach this piece right to the top as we're making the lid a piece of the box. We'll come back with our table saw and cut this portion off once the glue has a chance to dry. Now, if you don't have a table saw or if you're uncomfortable making this type of cut, you can easily go ahead and rip those pieces down before putting the box together. Here's where I made a mistake though, but I was able to correct it as I caught it. I started putting the trim pieces on before I had the lid taken off. And well, that's just not going to work because it won't sit flat onto the table saw. So we're actually going to take this piece back off run over to the table saw, and now we can cut the lid off. Just make sure that you leave enough space for your decorative edge as well as a flat piece so it can accept the hinges and the clasp on both the lid and the base. Now we can come back and add our decorative molding to the top of the box. This will help hide those plywood edges and make the box look like a nice solid piece of wood. Now again, to attach these, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use our pin nailer and some glue. Now to cut these miters, we're going to go over to our miter saw. You could do this with a table saw sled as well, like we did in the beginning, and make the miters on the table saw, and a lot of times it's a lot more accurate, but my miter saw is actually pretty well dialed in, so we're able to do it there. Now as we are waiting for the glue to dry on the trim, we can actually come back to the box itself, and we're going to edge band the top once again because we want to hide that plywood edge. But as you can see, as we trim back the edge banding, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use one of our squares. We're going to make 45-degree cuts because we don't want to hide that mitered edge, as it kind of adds a little accent to it and puts a little bit more quality into the piece. So now for the purpose of the box we're building here, it's going to be a donation box. So we need to route out a little channel here to accept the donations. But we don't want the backside to blow out. So we're going to use some two-sided tape and grab that scrap piece of wood again. We're going to tape it to the bottom of the lid. That way the router, as it goes through the top panel, it's not going to blow out the plywood on the other side. Now we're just going to go ahead and we're almost going to do a plunge cut into the lid. This would have been a lot easier using my plunge router itself, but I decided to just try it with my handheld trim router and see if it could handle it. Now it did create a lot of heat with that router bit, so you need to be careful with that, as you can see a little bit of smoke starting to plow through here. A better process probably would have been to start with the smaller router bit, make that cut, and slowly step our way up into this 1/2 inch here. I was a little rushed, and you can see it really starts to smoke up here a little bit. So I would advise doing that if you're redoing this project. Now once we're done with our router, we can go ahead and remove the clamp, and we can flip the project over and remove that sacrificial piece. And as you can see, it stopped all the blowout from happening on that panel. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to apply the stain to the project itself. Now we had to backtrack a little bit after this, as we wanted to burn Charity underneath that notch into the lid. But as you can see, this is the process of staining. That BAC wiping stain really takes onto the wood though quite well, and it will match the existing actual oak to the plywood, and you won't get any blotches that way. But here we are just mapping out Charity, and we're going to make a head notch where the center point is and then work our way out from there, starting with the middle letter, and you can either work right to left and then come back and work right to left. Wait, that was the same way. So you work right to left and then left to right. Something like that. So now that we have the lettering all penciled in, we can bring back our little burner here, and we can easily trace over those lines and make a nice little script burnt into the lid. It's a nice little touch. Now that the stain has had time to dry, we can come back with our lacquer. I really like to use lacquer just because of the quick dry time, but also the way the finish comes out super smooth if you sand in between coats, and it really does make a nice touch to the end. So now that the lacquer is all dry, we can come back and we can add our decorative hinge and clasps to the lid. Now when it comes to the hinges, we want to make sure that they're equally distant from the edge. That way it'll look appeasing to the eye. So once we get that indicated and marked up, we can use our centering bit here to drill our pilot holes and then come back with a screwdriver to put in the brass screws. Do not use a power drill to put these in, as they are easily snapped and it's going to cause a headache. We actually have a video on how to correct that if you do run across that, but just do yourself a favor, use a screwdriver. That way you don't create more work for yourself in the long run. Now that we have those hinges attached to the lid, we can bring the lid, put it onto the base of our box, and repeat the process of using our centering bit to drill our pilot holes. And now we can attach the bottom portion of the hinge to the box. Now with the hinges securing the lid to the box, we can come back to the front and add our clasp. Now we want to find the centering point, get that nice and lined up. Now this clasp actually came with nails, and we want to be able to secure this box closed with screws instead of nails, so it won't be able to just be pried off. But that clasp, the holes aren't going to be large enough to accept the brass screws that I had on hand. So very delicately I just drilled the holes slightly larger so it'll accept the screws. Just be very careful with this, as this is brass, so it's very thin and flexible and very easy to damage. So take your time if you're going to go ahead and do this. But as you can see, we did enlarge the holes enough so it'll accept the screws, so the clasp can be attached to the lid in a more secured manner. So now that we have the clasp attached to the lid, we just need to add the bottom portion of it to the box itself, which is simple enough. We just lined it up into its position to make sure that when the clasp is shut, it will grab that portion. Now, you can see here we demonstrate if you were just using this for a decorative box, you could go ahead and use the nails, but those nails are very tight. So what I do is I take one of my smaller hammers, put it up against the nail, and then use another hammer to put it down. And just like that, the box is complete. So that is it for our little charity box project here. Now, if you're just getting into woodworking, this is a great little project to start honing your skills and practice with. The reason why is because it incorporates a lot of different things that you're going to need to know how to do in your future woodworking. Specifically, making the box, we had to miter the edges as well as decorative trim out here, learning how to miter and make those measurements and make it accurate so it turns out properly. As well as we did a little bit of router work, cutting the notch out. Now, if you were maybe making a box to do maybe a keepsake or a jewelry box, you wouldn't need to do that, but you could work on routering some trim work yourself rather than using the store-bought ones that we had on hand. It's also going to teach you how to edge band if you use plywood, so it hides those edges and makes it look like a nice solid piece of wood, as well as staining and finishing, which is a technique that a lot of people can, when they get into woodworking, that's one piece that they have trouble with, whether they get some blotches in the wood, the finish doesn't feel right. So this project really touches a lot of different things that you're going to come across in future woodworking. Also, with the extra little burning in there, that's another technique that you can hone in and start practicing with on a project like this, rather than a larger one where you could really waste some expensive material. So it's a great little project to get into, and I'm gonna say I'm really happy the way it turned out. We put it together we could have literally done this probably in a day, especially using the lacquer. Dries pretty quickly, but with our busy schedule, being parents and all, we got to run around. So it took us a couple of days to finish it up. But I hope you guys like it, and if you have any questions that we might not have covered in the video, go ahead and leave a comment. We'll try to get those answered as much as possible and in a timely manner. So thank you for your patience if you are waiting for one of our responses. The channel's growing, so that's getting a little more difficult to get to, but we do appreciate that patience and your interest in the project itself. That being said, if it's your first time here, we'd love to earn your subscription, as it really does help us out as a channel. And if you're one of our returning viewers, thank you so much for your continued support. It really does help us out as a channel, and it allows us to continue to make content like this. So thank you for that. That being said, we're going to wrap this one up. So thanks for buzzing by. You go make some dust.